Continuing on with our study guide reading, Chapter 11, The Rise and Spread of Islam, here on page 111, Al-Andalus. The flowering Islamic culture became particularly pronounced in Al-Andalus, or Islamic Spain. In 711, Berbers from North Africa conquered the Iberian Peninsula, which is where Spain and Portugal are, penetrating the European continent until their advance was stopped about 200 miles south of Paris at the Battle of Tours in 732. Allies of the Umayyad dynasty, the caliphs of Al-Andalus, served to preserve Greco-Roman culture, enhancing it with the scientific and mathematical developments of the Muslim world. The Caliphate of Cordoba boasted a magnificent library and free education in Muslim schools. Inter-regional commerce thrived, which is trade, while Arabic words such as alcohol, algebra, and sofa were added to the Spanish vocabulary, and Muslim styles such as minarets, rounded arches, and arabesques were used in Spanish art and architecture. Islam in India and Southeast Asia. Between the 7th and 12th centuries, Muslims expanded their influence from northwest India to the Indus Valley and a large portion of northern India. Centering their government at Delhi, the rulers of the Delhi Sultanate extended their power by military conquest, controlling northern India from 1206 to 1526. Unsuccessful at achieving popularity among the Indians as a whole because of their monotheistic beliefs, the Muslim conquerors found acceptance among some Buddhists. Members of lower Hindu castes and untouchables also found Islam appealing because of its accepting and egalitarian nature. Although militarily powerful, the Delhi Sultanate failed to establish a strong administration. It did, however, introduce Islam to the culture of India. In Southeast Asia, Islam spread more from commercial contacts, or trade, and conversion than from military victories. By the 8th century, Muslim traders reached Southeast Asia, with migrants from Persia and southern Arabia arriving during the 10th century. Although the new faith did not gain widespread popularity among Buddhist areas of mainland Southeast Asia, the inhabitants of some of the islands of the Indian Ocean, familiar with Islam from trading contacts, were receptive to the new faith. Hinduism and Buddhism remained popular with many of the island peoples of the Indian Ocean. At the same time, however, Islam also found a stronghold on the islands of Malaysia, Indonesia, and the southern Philippines. Islam in Africa. The spirit of jihad, or Islamic holy war, brought Islam into Africa in the 8th century. Wave after wave of traders and travelers carried the message of Muhammad across the sands of the Sahara along caravan or trade routes. In the 10th century, Egypt was added to the Muslim territories. The authoritarian rulers of African states in the savannas south of the Sahara Desert adapted well to the Muslim concept of unification of secular and spiritual powers in the person of the Caliph. By the 10th century, the rulers of the Kingdom of Ghana in West Africa converted to Islam, followed in the 13th century by the conversion of rulers of the Empire of Mali to the east of Ghana. Although widely accepted by the rulers of these regions, the common people preferred to remain loyal to their traditional polytheistic beliefs. When they did convert to Islam, they tended to blend some of their traditional beliefs and practices with those of Islam. Some of the Sudanic societies were resistant to Islam because their matrilineal structure offered women more freedom than did the practice of Islam. Along the east coast of Africa, Indian Ocean trade was the focal point that brought Islam to the inhabitants of the coastal areas and islands. East African cities such as Mogadishu, Mombasa, and Kilwa became vibrant centers of Islam that caught the attention of Ibn Battuta an Arab traveler who journeyed throughout the world of Islam in the 14th century. Islam did not experience much success in finding converts in the interior of Africa. In East Africa, as in the western portion of the continent, rulers were the first to convert to Islam, followed much later, if at all, by the masses. Women in Eastern Africa already experienced more freedoms than did their Muslim counterparts, a fact that made them resistant to the new faith. The Mamluk dynasties. With the destruction of Islamic power in Baghdad at the hands of the Mongols, see chapter 14, the Mamluk dynasties provided the force that made Egypt a center for Muslim culture and learning. The Mamluks were converts to Islam who maintained their position among the caliphs by adhering to a strict observance of Islam. By encouraging the safety of trade routes within their domain, the Mamluks contributed to the prosperity of Egypt during the 14th and 15th centuries until internal disorder led to their takeover in the 16th century by the Ottoman Turks. The role of women in Islamic society. The role of women in Islam underwent considerable change from the time of Muhammad to the 15th century. In the early days of Islam, women were not required to veil and were not secluded from the public. These customs were adopted by Islam after later contact with Middle Eastern women. The seclusion of the harem originated with the Abbasid court. From the time of Muhammad onward, Muslim men, following the example of Muhammad, could have up to 4 wives, provided that they could afford to treat them equally. Women, by contrast, were allowed only 1 husband. In many respects, however, Islamic women enjoyed greater privileges than women in other societies at the same time. Both men and women were equal before Allah, and female infanticide was forbidden, meaning killing female babies was forbidden. Women could own property both before and after marriage. In some circumstances, Islamic women could initiate divorce proceedings and were allowed to remarry if divorced by their husband. As time progressed, however, the legal privileges enjoyed by Islamic women were counterbalanced by their seclusion from the public, a situation designed to keep women, especially those from the urban elite classes, away from the gaze of men. This isolation often created barriers against the acceptance of Islam, especially among African women. Furthermore, both the Quran and the Sharia established a patriarchal society. Slavery and Dar al-Islam. Islamic law forbade its followers from enslaving other Muslims, except in the case of prisoners of war. Neither was the position of a slave hereditary. Muslims were frequently known to free their slaves, especially if they converted to Islam during their period of servitude. Children born to a slave woman and a Muslim man were considered free. Rapid review. From the 7th century to the 15th centuries, Islam served as a unifying force throughout many parts of Asia, Europe, and Africa, contributing to the cultural landscape of all 3 continents. Islam preserved the learnings of the Greeks, Romans, and Persians, blending it with artistic, scientific, and mathematical knowledge of its own culture. Educational opportunities were extended and urban centers established as Dar al-Islam extended its influence into the everyday lives of the inhabitants of the Eastern Hemisphere.